Okay. Welcome to I don't know where Kari just went. Welcome to the March 14th meeting of the Implementation Advisory Committee. I am going to wait to do a roll call until Kari and Kezia are here, because that's when we will have the quorum. But I'm going to start the meeting. I sent along a lot of documents and an email yesterday with a lot of information in it. So apologies for like flooding an email box with share requests or share information. Oh shoot, we lost Terrence too. Let me just make sure. Text them, make sure that they know they dropped. Okay. So I sent over a lot of information yesterday. You should have in front of you the distribution proposal. That's the most important thing we're looking at. We'll do a brief overview of the ratio simulation, but I sent a video explaining that yesterday, so I don't want to take up too much of your time doing it today. And then, there's some background reading that we've already gone over before, but, there was a presentation I gave, like a slideshow that I gave to you. And then there's a distribution chart, which just like runs through all the benefits of each system and like the administrative, what goes into the administration of each method too. And so before we dive in, any questions about the materials or information or the agenda? The other thing is that I might, when Kezia joins, we'll have that quorum, and I might actually pause the conversation and shift over and do a vote on the match caps. These are things you've already reached consensus on. We just need the formal vote. And I figured it'd be better to do the vote as early as possible while everyone's on the call. So just giving you a heads up about that. Okay. Well, so what we're looking at is distribution methods. And, remember there are 4 that I presented around. There's a flat grant system, flat grant system. There is a ratio multiple match, which is somewhat similar to what Portland has, but not exactly. There's a ratio multiple match plus a grant, and then there's a voucher program, and that's what they have in Seattle. I'm going to focus this conversation on 3 of them, because in our last meeting, while I think a lot of people were, like the idea of the vouchers, they recognize that like this might not be the time to be launching a vouchers program. So because we didn't have a lot of interest in continuing that conversation, I'm just going to focus on the other 3. So I think like just one of the proposal. I'll start with the ratio simulation. This is just a spreadsheet I built that has information about like what, and this spreadsheet is only relevant to if you will adopt a ratio match or a ratio match with grant. Not all programs require a ratio. The flat grant program does not, but the ratio multiple match does. So if you all decide to go in that direction, this is the information. This is the information for what ratio to propose. So it's kind of like a little bit of a sidebar conversation, but an important one. So under the ratio simulation, we have the other localities and what their ratios look like. So I think Kari wants to join me and let him in.
And Daniel, do you want us to separately have up the spreadsheet that you're talking about, or are you intending to share your screen?
Hey, Kari.
Kari.
All right.
Nice.
There we go.
I can. I'm happy to share my screen. That's not an issue. So why don't I just do that now? Sorry, I'm just like running through what I sent over yesterday really quickly. Okay, so this is that ratio simulation spreadsheet, and it shows the ratios in different and the ratio matches in different localities that have those programs. Again, not every program has a ratio multiple match. So these are just the ones that do. And the only thing that's important to point out here is that you can see the range is generally between like 5-to-1 up to 9-to-1. That's usually like a typical range for what a ratio match looks like. And then we also have this ratio spreadsheet where I run through different scenarios. So if we had, like, for instance, a 9-to-1 on 20, like what the city of Portland has, how many unique individual donors living in Multnomah County would a candidate need in order to reach the match cap? Candidates don't always have to reach the match cap, many don't, but the match caps were designed to allow candidates to be competitive in high spending races. And so it does need to be achievable. People need to actually be able to get there. So, and there's this table underneath that, so like if I, for instance, type 12-to-1 on 50, it'll change the number of donors required. So that's how I got to these numbers. No worries, Beth. So I think the important thing, there's two things to really keep in mind. Number one is this here is the average of what candidates can raise. And these are unique individual donors living in Multnomah County. And those are typically the only ones we match. And so that's why I'd focus on these. And this is the high average for people who are high performers. And then this first tier is what you already set as a qualification metrics. So the important thing to know is that if this is the average that candidates get to, and this is the high average, then they have to be able, and this is where we want them to go to be able to get into the program, then we have to consider that as like the core metric for what ratio match we choose. And that's why I don't think the Portland ratio match is good for Multnomah County, because Multnomah County candidates typically have far fewer donors. We want to encourage them to have more donors for sure. But it's going to take them a while to get to that point. I think in the first couple of election cycles, we're not going to have any race where a chair is getting 3,600 donors. I don't even think anyone in the mayor's race got 3,600 donors last year. And so I think the Portland mayors or the Portland ratio is not something we can copy over here, because it just requires too many donors for both the chair and for all the other candidates too. Like 277 for the sheriff to reach their match cap. The sheriff on average is getting like 112. 555, I'm sorry, 277 for the auditor, 555 for the sheriff, and the sheriff is getting 112 on average. 1388 for a council, for a commission candidate, and on average bringing in 257. So that's why I'm mentioning. Go ahead.
But of course, you're talking about how many donors they had when there was not a matching program, where they would not have prioritized small dollar donations, they would prioritize high dollar donations. You change the rules of the game and you change the strategy of how you play the game. So I think now your note about how the mayoral candidates did is compelling, because we are talking about similar rules to that effort. And if Keith Wilson, Carmen Rubio, and Ray Gonzalez couldn't get to 3,000 donors, then we shouldn't expect anybody running for county chair to get there either. But to compare to what past county chair candidates did isn't necessarily apples to apples.
Well, I will say that I only think maybe like one or two of the 50-some candidates who qualified for council in 2024 who ran under a small donor program for the city, only two of them got anywhere close to 1388. Most of them were like 1,000 or below. I think
that's much more instructive.
Yeah, and I think it's true that when we change the law, it does encourage candidates to like change their strategy and reach more donors, and that's the purpose of the program. But also, it has to actually be achievable, and I just don't think in one election cycle people are going to go from getting 250 on average donors to 1388 on average donors. I think it's going to take a long time for like that culture to slowly change. James.
I really appreciate all the expertise that we have on this commission. And I watched the video from last week, so I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be here with you all. I was celebrating my mom's birthday with her. But I did watch the video, and I appreciated the dialogue that you all had kind of around this issue. And I'm really wondering, I mean, Kari, but anyone, but especially Kari, what is your inclination? I heard you really emphasizing the, change the game and you change the strategy that people use for the game. And that seems right to me. And I'm wondering what kind of factor you think is reasonable, because I do think I agree with you that the city of Portland feels like a little bit more apples to like quince or something. But I do think that it's not exactly, Multnomah County is not going to be city of Portland for like a few reasons. I do think voters and donors kind of care less about the county. I think that the term limits and the weird things that creates, like that usually people running for chair are currently seated, commissioners. Like, I'm just kind of wondering what, I hear you that we shouldn't be basing it entirely on historic performance, because that's not they're going to be having a totally different strategy. But what do you think is reasonable? I mean, what are you estimating in your head for, if the chair historically, the average was 280 or 515 for high average, like, what do you think is reasonable for the kind of most competitive candidates for chair?
You're totally right about the city council gets historically gotten a lot more attention. I used to joke with people that the statewide name ID of Portland City Council candidates is likely higher than that for our state elected officials, like the state treasurer. More people know who the city council candidates are in Eugene, the media coverage of city council. So that's, you're right, there's part of that. Multnomah County is just less sexy. Sorry. I do think though that if you say to people, okay, if you're running for office, you want to get $250 million, you got to get 500 voters. They're going to get 500 voters. Even though that's previously been the high water mark. Like, again, people just change their strategies. I would be. I think we need to really focus on elevating small dollar donors. I'd be interested in potentially even like a 2-tier system, right, where there's some larger multiplier on like super small donations, like under $20 or $10, and then there's a smaller match on the next tier up to like $50 or even $100. I don't know. I haven't really done the math here, but I would like to encourage both super small donations and what we'll call just regular small donations, like under $100, would be reasonable to me. Just throw an idea out there.
Yeah,
I know it's unreasonable. 500 to 1,000 donations if they're running for county chair. That seems like a reasonable range. If you can't get to 1,000 donations running in the county this size, maybe you should be a county chair.
Yeah, Terrence.
I've struggled, even last meeting, I really struggled with when I hear y'all talk about how easy it is. It is really complicated in this world where people are struggling economically, where people have lost faith in the system, where you are trying to convince community members that are now looking ahead at a federal government that feel detached from it, to convince them that when they give you even $10, that it actually will impact their lives. I assure y'all, as a person that ran, it is difficult to get to 250 people. It is difficult to get to 750 people. It is even more difficult to break that number. Like, these are not easily achievable matrix. I said it last time, and I think some folks lightweight kind of dismiss what I said because their attachment to these systems, whether it's union, whether it's not-for-profits, like regular people, everybody struggle. They struggle to get to these numbers because they do not come with systems. If you are a system person, of course, what I'm saying will make you a little bit uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, you have people you prop up and you feel real comfortable about. But if we're creating these type of systems to get the regular folks involved and it allows them to be competitive, I assure y'all they will struggle to get to 750 unless we're going to continue to allow the common political types that continue to come. If you want to look at a new chair and you feel like we need a fresh look, our former chairs or commissioners that are already sitting in those seats will come with way easier methods to get to 750, whereas a normal person who work every day and care about our county, 250 or 300 might be that starting point to get the finances they need to really get in the game. So I would just encourage everybody, like, consider that if in the heart of what we're trying to do, we want normal, non-political types to be in these fights and stand a chance and get the support that we need. Some of these numbers are, I mean, when you look at Commissioner 250, I think that's reasonable. I think that's, I understand. But 750 is a tough starting place. But I get it. The chair is a big seat, and you're definitely going to need that level of support to stand a chance. So I mean, I digress a little bit, y'all. I see how it seems like I'm on both sides of this, but just consider, like, if we want regular folks to stand a chance, right? Just a little bit of chance, then we can bring it down. And certainly, I agree with everybody, James. I agree that listen, the city council race is going to be a different monster. We're going to pay more attention to it. We rarely pay attention to what's happening in those county seats, right? So, I think if we use to your point, Daniel, if we try to use the city of Portland standard, we're going to run into some trouble where regular folks will never, if ever, get to the second tier or third tier for sure, maybe third. But just consider that, y'all. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but if our goal is to consider the everyday person, then we certainly should not want to create complex pathways for everyday people to fight in this fight. So just a thought. That's not a disagreeing with anybody. I just want us all to keep in mind that as a formerly regular old person that started in this, it was hard, y'all. I'm telling y'all, it was really, really difficult. And I felt at a disadvantage, and I needed a lot of people to buy into me before I got to those next donor matches. And sorry about the camera being off, y'all, but I'm here. I just want y'all to know.
Before I
Thank you so much.
just want to add on one quick thing to that. Like, one thing that I think is also, like, I think what Terrence is raising is really important. And in addition to that, it's important to know that, like, candidates need to be able to reach these donor counts not by the end of the race. They need to reach these midway through, because they have to have time to actually spend the matching funds they get. So if they actually get, like, the final, if they actually get to, like, the match cap, but it's like October, then it's challenging for them to actually turn that money around and, like, buy ads and, like, pay staff and, like, actually actualize it. So it has to be achievable within a reasonable time frame for them. It's like just something I want to add on to that. Kari, I saw you raise your hand, so I want to give you a chance.
Yeah, I actually, and Terrence, I hope I didn't come across as having dismissed your experience, because I think it's exactly correct. What we definitely saw, right, city council races was the folks who had pre-existing networks, pre-existing brands, and the ability to do it full time and not part-time next to their job. They're the ones that were the most successful. And the first-time candidates who had day jobs really struggled. So I guess I'm sitting here kind of noodling on this today. I do want to make sure that, as Daniel said, people can actually get there and can get there on time. I think it's also important to recognize that part of the, if you want to get elected to office, you gotta find people to support you, right? That's not a zero factor. I should say you signed up and here's $500,000. So I guess I don't know if we're to the point where we're going to make to pitch ideas here, but the thing I've been seeing is noodling on is an idea of, to sharpen my point earlier, maybe got to be a 20-to-1 or 19-to-1 match on the first $20, and then a 5-to-1, or I guess what we call a 4-to-1 match on the next $80, which would mean that the $20 donation, if somebody gives you $100, the first 20 would become 400, and the next 80 would become another 400. So your 100 turns into $800. I don't know. It's a thought. I'm not necessarily wedded to it, but some kind of a two-tier deal like that, where there's a lot of value to that small donation, and then some value for the next $100. Yes.
Appreciate that, Marshall.
Yeah, just a couple quick observations. So one, looking at the chart on the upper right where you have the candidate average, high average, et cetera, pretty clear that we may have been off in our tier 1, 2, 3 numbers. I mean, just being honest with that, I feel like we missed the boat there. But secondly, I think one of the things we are missing on this ratio portion, because like even looking at the, the 10-to-1 that you have in column B there to needing 1,300 donors, we are, I believe the group wanted to do a grant first and then the matching. So I think if you have it set up in a way that when you hit a certain tier, you get a chunk of money, that's going to alleviate the matching ratio number. And I don't know if you have that data blended in where, okay, if we give a lump sum at 100 voters, right, where we give $50,000 or whatever that number is, then that changes the ratio, because then you're getting somebody that money at the beginning of the campaign to get them started, get the campaign staff going, do all the things they need to do. And then you have the ratio going over there. So at any rate, the two observations I see, it feels like we're really off on our tier 1, 2, 3 numbers. And I feel like we need to have some kind of what are we doing for our grant, then the ratio match. How does that blend together?
Yeah, I was actually going to go through several proposals later. One of them includes that. I will say I didn't have the adjustment for, if they get a grant at first, what that would change the ratio for that. But, I think that's something I could definitely bring to you. Or, we might even feel like, I think let's have that conversation about which method we like. And then like, if we feel like we want to pursue that method, I can pull that together. I think Terrence, you had your hand raised next. Oh, and you're muted.
I was thinking like our middle place is the same thing. I think we all need to recognize that to be legit, and especially at that tier 2, tier 3 place, you have to compete at the higher level. But if I want to give people a fighting chance at the tier 1, I'm definitely with you, Marshall. I like the thought of like, hey, get in that fight at tier 1. Let's show you willing to put in a fight. If tier 2 and tier 3 become a little more difficult, then I know you're putting in the work. You can staff up. You can strategically use what you have to get to the voters to get more support. But I'm with y'all. If we can make tier 1 reasonable, like y'all got me out of the way. I think that's in the heart of what I'm saying. Like tier 1 has to be reasonable for regular people. And then when you can staff up and you get that financing behind you, things change. I assure y'all, like that first payout excites you. It gets you, it makes you feel legitimate, and it makes you feel like you can compete. And then as we get into 2 and 3, I don't think 3 should be easy, right? I think it should show your ability to reach the voter and put in the work. So I'm with you guys there. But if we can get tier 1 at a healthy place and we can meet at a healthy place, I think we can bring folk, the everyday person will get excited and they will compete. So I think, Marshall, I totally agree with you. I think we all saying we want to have a standard, but we also want to give people that fighting chance. I think if we find our middleman together, then folks will be able to get into it. So Marshall beat me to it. That's all I'm saying.
Interesting that you say that, because you bring up an important point. In systems that have tiers, usually the idea behind a third tier is, it is high to get to, but that's particularly for candidates who are in like high spending races or have a lot of IE spending against them. And they can then get enough money if they have enough popular support. So like a candidate who has, a lot of third party spending against them, but they have like a huge base of support, could be able to then get, be able to have enough money because they get to the third tier. So like the third tier is supposed to be hard is what I'm saying. We can, I'm happy to adjust the tiers. I do kind of want, I do think 750 would be really high for a chair's race for the very beginning. Especially because like, as you can see, the high average is 515. And we have the first chair's race going to be next year in 2026. We do want most of the candidates to be able to get into the program. It's not good for the program, and most of the candidates can't access it. So, you know, happy to like adjust the tier. You know, I was wondering like maybe for just a chair race, instead of 750, you know, we could look at like 500 or 600 or 650. What do people think about those numbers? Marshall.
Honestly, I think for tier one, 250 for both chair and commissioner is far more reasonable in my book. If you want to adjust tiers 2 and 3 on the commissioner's race or the chair's race, I could see that. But again, you're trying to let these folks get their campaign started. And I just know from talking to the city of Portland city councilors and all the 18 million of them that we interviewed, so many of them struggled to get to 250. Like that was a lot of work to get to 250 for those folks. So again, it's got to be something that's attainable. Your average is only 280. So, I mean, we're asking them to at least hit average to get started. 750 is like crazy to me.
Okay, I think Terrence, I saw your hand next, and then James. And you're on mute, Terrence.
Lord, I'm terrible. I know y'all. Again, I agree. I mean, you just said it, Daniel. If we really want to be competitive and we really want to get new folks in these fights, I think it has to be reasonable. If our average is 280, like 750, and immediately, y'all, it knocks out folks that do not come with powerful systems. So just keep that in mind. And maybe 250 isn't the answer. But I think 750 is really, really high at tier 1. And I agree with Marshall. That means we have to make tier 2 and tier 3 a little bit more aggressive. Then I'm there, but I would love to see more competition at tier 1.
Okay. James, I think you were next, and then Beth, and then Curry.
It was Beth, and then James, and then
Oh, my apologies.
after you,
Go ahead,
Beth.
Beth.
You could have gone. I wouldn't have minded. Just a quick clarifying question. The averages on the upper right chart, that's the average amount of donors per election cycle, right?
Yeah, that is the average number of donors who are unique donors who live in Multnomah County. That's not all the donors we give to these candidates.
Okay, but per the election cycle?
Yeah, so these were averages based on you know, when they ran under contribution limits.
Okay.
And yeah, it would include an election cycle.
So, but
And
sorry, I don't think Daniel's answered your question, or not the part that I'm interested in. So I don't friendly amendment to Beth's question. Daniel, I think Beth's asking, is this primary and general separated out, or is this for the candidates who advance to the general? This is all the entire, both elections, their primary and their general.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be primary and general for November candidates.
okay.
Yeah.
In that case, thank you for amending my question, James. In that case, and to your point earlier around, you know, we want these to be achievable before the end of the election. You know, they need time to spend the money. I would recommend that the tier 1 donors be a decent amount lower than the average, because if the average commissioner is getting 250 unique donors, but over the course of the whole election, like I just want to make sure that like we're not setting them up for failure by saying like, okay, total amount of donors that they've gotten in the past is 257. That might mean that people might not be able to reach 250 until closer towards the end, like closer towards the election. I don't know if I'm making a whole lot of sense here, but I just want to ensure that like we're not setting them up for failure by setting that tier 1 too high, as people have stated. But I might recommend even going lower than 250. If their total amount of donors average is 257, that seems like people might struggle to get there before November. I don't know if that's, I see Kari shaking his head. So if I said something wrong, you know, please feel free to correct me. Yeah.
I appreciate that. I'm gonna get to you, Kari, but I know James, you were in line.
Yeah, I guess for me, I haven't been sure how to engage with this conversation exactly, because I'm still in the camp of like, I think fixed grants have some definite benefits. And one of them that I want to put the plug in right now is I do think it's helpful to be able to communicate to donors, as someone who has like done a bunch of stumping to raise these small donor contributions, as a treasurer for like a campaign that participated in the program, it is a big benefit to be able to say, you give me $5 and that turns into, you know, whatever, $50. And once we start having different match rates, or like, oh, now I'm targeting this and I get this amount of money, it's going to get way more confusing for donors. And I think that actually makes it harder to raise the money. Like, people are motivated by, wow, my $5 turns into $50 for this candidate that I care about. And if you can't communicate what that amount is, I think it becomes harder to raise the money. I am, and my next point is, I do think having a lower, and I don't want to relitigate stuff that you all voted on last time, but I do think putting the tier 1 at a lower threshold and a lower dollar amount. I don't think a chair needs, like, let's say that we decreased the initial tier 1 to like 250 donors. I don't think 250 donors should equal $200,000. Like, you don't need $200,000 to hire 2 staff for a few months. And if the tier 1 is really who's serious, you know, and it's like a larger gap to get to the more heavy, the larger dollar amount, which would be like tier 2 or tier 3, then that allows you to kind of say, oh, you only need 250,000 to get your first, you only need 250 donors to get your first 40,000 or whatever, like we think makes sense to like staff up a campaign. But then you need, you know, 1,000 donors to get a sizable amount of money, which I think makes sense in a fixed grants system, but in a straight match, that will be impossible to communicate. Okay, check.
Totally. Curry.
First of all, to say I'm trying to get a little lost on exactly what we decided and what's still in play and all that. So it'd be great to sort of get a level set at some point. But to Beth's point, I totally hear you, Beth, that we do need to make it so people can hit them early. And James, your point that perhaps we got to have a lower tier 1 that has a lower grant. That makes sense. I mean, I think the idea of the elections in November, but I can hit that first 40 grand in March, right? That's real, right? So I'm down for that. And that reason he's kind of shaking my head was I want to keep reminding folks that those averages are based on the non-match system. And from a candidate perspective, there's no match. There's a $600 limit. You spend all your time chasing $500 donations. You have to spend any time chasing $10 donations. We change the rules and we say there's a 10 or 15 or 20 to 1 match for the first 10 or 20 or 50 bucks. You're going to spend all their time chasing those small donations. So I'm not terribly concerned that people who are running for county chair of Multnomah County can't find 300 people to give them 20 bucks. They can't find 300 people to give them 20 bucks for county chair. I don't know, man. Like, maybe they shouldn't be county chair. Commissioner is another story. So I don't know. And I am persuaded, James, by my 2-tier system, or hell, at one point I was sketching a 3-tier system, is over-engineered and will probably be too difficult for anyone to figure out. I guess I would be inclined to drop the chair tier 1, the 750, down to 500, and take chair tier 3 and push up to 1,500. So now we're at 500, 1,000, 1,500. And then for commissioner, drop tier 1 down to 200, but leave it 400 and 600. I don't know if you should put that into the spreadsheet there, Daniel, because it's just an idea. I would love to hear everybody else's views. I think the sheriff and auditor is probably fine to me at this point. But Beth, James, Terrence, what do you think?
I do think dropping down tier 1 makes sense, but again, I do think it's more complicated if we're only talking about a ratio multiple match right now. Like, for me, in the fixed grant sense, I definitely think that makes sense, but then I would also adjust the grant size so that the tier 1 is like a smaller, actually getting started kind of amount, and the other ones are more like you're running a full campaign now.
Yeah. Marshall.
I get the thought process on that, but again, look at your average and your high average numbers. Your average number is 280. And so putting tier 1 at 500 to me does not make any sense. I mean, that's almost double what your average candidate was able to bring in contributions. Now, could there be a difference in those? But I think it is challenging to get to those individual tiers. And I get it, it's the chair race, but you're having to go out and get people to not just support you, but give you money. And that's a different animal entirely when you're going out and doing these things. It's one thing to get somebody to say they'll vote for you. It's another thing for them to open up their wallet. So looking at least the history for some kind of a like benchmark level, you know, you're essentially saying, okay, the highest performer is where we want to set our tier 1 average. That doesn't make any sense to me. It just really doesn't. So that's where I'm at with it.
Dana, how many
James-
donations,
Oh, go ahead, Kari.
the mayoral candidates, how many donations did the 3 leading mayoral candidates get? Renee, Carmen, and Keith?
They each got above, I think above 1,100. I would say like Keith got the most. I think you brought in, I think maybe above like 1,600. And I believe Renee and Carmen got like around 1,100 to 1,200.
Yeah, to me, Marshall, that's the more comparable thing as opposed to comparing to what JVP and Sharon Myron did in a world where there was no match. So they spent all their time chasing primary motivations, in the West Hills. Right, that's the comparison. Okay, I'll stop there.
James, then Beth.
I guess I just want to kind of add to the point Kari's been making. I mean, Kari has been generously saying that previously folks were chasing $603 or whatever the old limit was donations. But I actually think for the county races, and particularly county chair races, the direct fundraising game was not even really the game. And people, sure, spent some amount of time asking for $500, but really they spent a lot of their time on endorsements that they thought might result in IEs or other kinds of support. And now if we're providing a path by which a candidate can have enough money within their campaign to run, I do think we'll see a behavior change. I mean, which is not, I still hear you, Marshall, especially for like early support. Maybe 500 is still like too high. But I do think candidates will lean more into how do I get a larger number of unique donors in Multnomah County, which the historical data doesn't reflect.
Okay, Beth, then Marshall.
Yeah, I totally hear what everybody's saying. Just as a quick question, Daniel, the chair race is in 2026. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. In that case, I don't know how fully we can relate the chair race to the mayoral race because it's going to be in a midterm year. And we know that people aren't as plugged into elections during midterm races as they are during presidential races. Obviously, like it's also during our governor's race. So like we see, like we have slightly higher voter turnout than other states for midterm races. But I did just also want to remind folks of that. I would agree more so with Marshall in that I think that the tier 1 should be lower. And I don't know, maybe we can put like a caveat in our proposal that's like, if we're way off in our guesses for the tiers, amend it. Like, I don't know if we can do that, but I think it should be lower as well. Personally, I would be deciding. Yeah.
Okay. Marshall, then Kari.
Yeah, I totally agree with Beth. And I think we do see, I think there's a big difference between the Portland mayor and the Portland, or the Multnomah County chair race. I really do see a difference in those two races, especially for the timing of those things. In my mind, if we are going to make a mistake on the lower side as opposed to the higher side. If we set it at a number and the candidate blows that out of the water, like right off the get-go, then we have some real factual data to go off of that race. And then we go back and we adjust accordingly. Where I saw the city of Portland really struggle is I thought their numbers were too high for many of the candidates, and they really struggled hitting those targets, especially that second tier. And that ultimately led to what we've been talking about, where people are having trouble be even having a chance to get their voice out because they don't have the funds to do so. So I would rather err on the side of keep it at a because again, these numbers need to be attainable. That's the important side of things. Give them a number that is attainable, and then if they blow it out of the water, okay, then we go back and we fix it. But if you give them a number that's too high, because I don't think anybody's hitting 1,500, to be honest with you. I think that number is, I mean, and if you are, I don't think your focus is in the right spot for the race. You're trying to get too many individual contributions rather than getting your voice out and getting your message out to people. I think it's a shift in priorities for elections. So just my 2 cents.
Okay, Kari.
I've been thinking here a lot about James's note about we should also, in addition to talking about what the requirement is, what they get for that requirement, and maybe the solution, there's nothing magical about 3 tiers. Maybe the solution here is actually called these 3 that we're talking about here, tiers 2, 3, and 4, and create a new tier 1, a junior tier that's at like 200 donations for the chair and 100 for the commissioner, and then it's a small grant. And our expectation is they hit that in February, or March, or April. And it's a startup, essentially a startup chunk of money. And then they're finally competitive. They're off and running, right? They're gonna hire a person. They're like going, right? Maybe that's. I guess I'm thinking about that 500 and 200 as being like the equivalent of the 250 for the city council races. But it was not that. What if there's a junior tier before that, like an early sort of injection of cash so that they get going?
I see some interest in that. Kari, can you just repeat what your proposal is? I had to like send a message real quickly at that moment.
This, what we're talking about here is tier 1, 2, and 3, and make them tiers 2, 3, and 4, and create a new junior tier 1 that's very easily achievable and doesn't come with a lot of money. I don't know what the number would be, 20,000, 30,000, whatever the number is, right? It's a small amount of cash, but allows them to get started.
Okay.
James,
Other thoughts on this? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
James, I'd like to hear your reaction to that concept.
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically for, Daniel has always been kind of couching the first tier as a startup, funds, and getting to 750 donors for the chair and then getting $200,000. That doesn't set, like, you have to have been started up to get to 750. And so for me, I do think, lower amounts for like the initial qualifying. This does, I mean, to your point or your question earlier, Kari, about what's already been voted on. Like, I do think we have already voted on what the like initial qualifying is. And this would be to reset the qualifying, because tier 1, of course, you'd have to qualify in order to get money. But I do feel like in light of these conversations, it seems like everyone who's weighed in thinks tier 1, the initial qualifying has to be low enough that not only can people achieve it, but they can achieve it within a few months of starting to campaign so that they can so that it's meaningful. So I'm definitely for that. And I'm not totally sure what you're manipulating there, Daniel. What I heard from Kari was like, just take what you had, move it over 1 cell, and then add a new tier 1 that had, to be debated numbers. But Kari threw out, I think, 200 donors for chair and 100 donors for county commissioner.
Okay, 200 for chair, 100 for county commissioner. And then just going down the line here. So 200 for chair. Then the next one would take a significant leap up to 600, or like up to, a significant leap, right? The tier 2 is a significant leap. Is that right?
Yeah. And I mean, none of this has been discussed, but like the numbers that you had there of 750, 1,000, 1,250 or 1,500 or whatever it was, like, seemed fine to me.
Yeah, I'd go 200 and then 750. 1,000, 1,000, 1,500. So then you're gonna see that for county chair, you might have 5 or 6 people that hit that 200 level, and then like 3 people hit the 2nd level, and then like 1 or 2 people hit the 3rd level, right? That's the sort of.
Okay.
I think
And then
for the commissioner, we were at 250, 500, 750, I think. So that one,
250, 500, 750, oops, 750. Okay, and then for sheriff, you know,
Let's not even talk about those right now, because I think, I mean, I just want to understand from Marshall and Beth and Roxy and Terrence, if we have Terrence. I think that chair and commissioner, like, if that idea is acceptable to people, then it's worth talking about the sheriff and auditor, but I don't even know that we need to talk about them.
Okay, other opinions on Beth? I think you see you raise your hand.
Yeah, I like this as a good like option, kind of fully encompassing all that we've been talking about this whole meeting. I think that making sure that that tier 1 is lower, yeah, more people might hit it, but then the rest of the tiers are a little maybe more difficult to achieve. I think that that will give a lot of candidates a really good starting point, especially if we're doing the grant and then match ratio fund combo. I think that'll really set a lot of candidates up nicely, but also not overspend on other, like not setting the standard so low that like we're just out of money really quickly. I think it keeps things competitive. So yeah, I really like this. Kari, thank you for recommending that change, because I think that's kind of what we were all thinking, but maybe not voicing. So appreciate that.
Yeah, I think I saw Terrence and then Marshall.
Yeah, I agree. Kari, Marshall, and Beth. I just feel like we're walking it down. That feels great to me. I feel like we set a healthy place to start. Folks can get going, but we're just not handing out money if you really won't put in the work. So I feel really good about that. Thank y'all for, I'm a part of this. I feel good.
Wow, Marshall.
Yeah, same. I like what we're doing here. I think it's a good idea.
Awesome. Wow, I love this consensus. And I think James, you raise your hand.
Yeah, just to clarify what this is great. I'm glad that people like the Kari's kind of 4-tier proposal, but are we thinking then, so these 4 tiers, as Daniel has written down there, looks to me like those are kind of fixed grants at those various amounts. And I guess I just want to understand at those various head counts, and we'd have to associate what the correct dollar amounts is at each of those tiers. But then if folks are still talking, like Beth said, about having a ratio multiple match on top of that, then I guess I would just, are people thinking, okay, you collect donations of any amount to 200 people, and then 750 people, and then 1,000 people, and then 1,500 people. And then after you get your final grant at 1,500 people for chair, then there's a ratio multiple match. Like that can make sense to me, but then we'd have to understand like what's the match, and that adds some other kind of complexity. So I just want to understand, make sure I'm clear on what people are thinking.
Actually, this is a great moment to transition. Do you mind if we all hold our questions? I'd love to run quickly through the different methods, because I think that will answer James' question and like all these other questions too. And then we can like kind of move on from there. Okay. So I direct you over to this distribution method proposal. So I think just several things to point out here quickly.
Daniel, are you trying to share that? Because we're still seeing.
Oh,
this.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. Oh, this technology is gonna shoot. Why is it not letting me do it? Oh, there we go. Presents and notes. Okay. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. So we already know what this is so far. Just pointing out to you that we have these tiers, which of course, like you all just talked about revising, and then these are the match caps that you already. I actually don't think you took a vote on it yet, but you have consensus on. So just refreshing your memory on that. This is how Portland's system works. Portland is a combination of a ratio multiple match plus a tier, and I will say it is extremely confusing. So it's actually, it's different offices too. So under Portland system, when candidates run for mayor or auditor, once they hit that initial number, they qualify for the program. And then everything after that is a ratio multiple match. So that's a little bit more straightforward. And these are their match caps. The council is different though. And this is where it gets really complicated. So for the council, what they do is when they get to the initial qualifying number, and it'd be 250 for all candidates running for council. When they get there, then it unlocks a 9-to-1 on 20 match. The program goes back and matches all the donations raised so far and keeps going up until when the candidate reaches 100,000 matching funds. Then the program stops and doesn't match any more donations until the candidate hits the next tier, which is 750. And then the process repeats where we unlock, we go back and match all the donations that were not matched before. And then we keep going until they reach another 100,000. And the process repeats at 1250. So actually the Portland's version is not a pure ratio multiple match. It is a ratio multiple match with a tiered approach. And I will say it is extremely complicated to explain both to candidates and then to the public and organizations too. So I actually would not recommend matching a tier, bring a racial multiple match and a tier together. I think that is like a very difficult thing for people to wrap their heads around. So that's how Portland works. I'm going to just show you the different proposals. So this one is actually the one I recommend. I'm going to actually just call it the flat or fixed tier grant, just for clarity's sake. So under a fixed tier grant, the candidate reaches the initial tier, they qualify, and then they get a flat amount. It is the same flat amount for everyone. So any candidate who gets to, like, for instance, 750 for chair would get 200,000. Every candidate would do that. Then they are encouraged to raise more donors, and that's the democratic part of it. They have to keep raising more donors to get to the next tier. Once they get to tier 2, then they get a next flat grant. In this case, these are simulated numbers; these aren't real. But in the next case, they would get to 225,000, and then the third tier, once they get to 1250, they would get to 225,000. So it's always the same flat number. And there's a lot of, and the reason I'm recommending it is there's a lot of benefits to this program. So it's by far the easiest for campaigns to understand. You get to this number of donors, you then get this amount of money. It's very straightforward. It's a reliable amount of funding for all candidates. Every candidate is going, they know exactly what they're going to get. In this simulation, they're going to get $200,000. So they know exactly how to plan, how many people they want to hire, or, what ads they want to buy, etc. They can build a budget off of that. It's also more inclusive to low-income communities because under ratio multiple match, the more a donor gives you, the more the match is. So if you have donors who are wealthier and can afford bigger donations, you're going to get a bigger match. And that's going to advantage candidates who have support from wealthier communities.
It was only $20, right?
It is $20. And it doesn't sound like a huge difference between $5 and $20 or $1 and $20. But when you add them all up, we saw that candidates who are raising most of their donations from $5 in the Portland program were bringing in far less in match money than candidates who are raising the maximum amount.
Well, sorry, Kari, just to add to that, I mean, the proposals that we've been looking at that Daniel's proposing on the other page in order to get up to like 650,000 is not on $20. They're all on like $50. And the Portland program, which was originally $50, decided to bring it down to $20 with a higher match rate because they saw that the difference between $20 and $50 really favored people who could give a lot more money, and that it was like much more representative of the city to have a lower contribution limit that's matched at a higher amount. But in order to hit kind of 650 or whatever that we were saying for chair, we would have to have, like what Daniel proposed on the other thing is, I think 10 to 1 match on $50 or whatever. And so we're, again, kind of preferencing folks who can give $50.
I think, and thank you for both bringing up those points. The thing is that what's, I think, more inclusive of a fixed tier system is that it doesn't matter what the donor gives you. As long as you have the donor, you get the match, or you get closer to the tier. And so if all of your donors are giving you $5 or all of your donors are giving you the maximum amount, it's the same. Everyone gets the same fixed grant. And that's why it's a more inclusive version. It's administratively much more efficient too. The staff does not have to go through, and even with automation, this happens. the staff does not have to go through and like match the individual donations and calculate the total amount. Terrence, I'm going to ask if we can just hold our questions until the very end, because I just want to run through this all, make sure we all work in the same info. And so it's administratively more efficient, which means the cost of administration are lower, and it means the ability to get through. It means like the staff can turn around matching funds much quicker too. And then again, it provides candidates with enough funds to scale up early, as we talked about before, and it broadens the democratic achievement. So that's why I'm recommending a fixed tier grant, but I'll very quickly show you the other two. Ratio, I don't think you all have much interest in this because we just went through the tiered system in the other slide or the other tab, but a ratio multiple match, you know, if a candidate gets to that initial qualification, then every donation, then like it unlocks the match. Every donation they've raised so far and every donation going forward is matched by the same ratio. So in this example, it's 10 to 1 on $50. Everyone's matched by the same ratio. And then, you know, they get to until they reach their match cap. So that is a little bit, you know, I think that's a little simpler than the way Portland does it with the council races. This is closer to what Portland does with the mayor and auditor race. Again, I think there are issues. It advantages candidates with wealthier donors, and candidates, we saw this in Portland, candidates with support from low-income communities fall further behind. It can be confusing for people to understand. It's an unreliable amount of funding for candidates. They actually never really know how much they're going to get, even if they're tracking it on their own. They never really know how much they're going to get. And it's slower and costlier administration. Finally, I'm going to show you this version is a ratio multiple match plus a grant. And under this version, when candidates get to the first tier, it unlocks a flat grant. So maybe like 30,000 or 80,000, 200,000, everyone gets the same number. And then all the donations after that are matched by a ratio. So everyone gets those startup funds and then they move over to a ratio multiple match. And this alleviates some of the concerns by ratio multiple match, but not all of them. Again, once you get into the ratio proportion, all these issues still remain. It still is advantaging candidates with wealthier donors. It's, you know, so confusing, especially when you're putting the two systems together. It's still confusing when people understand. It's an unreliable amount of funding and it's lower cost of administration. So that's why I wanted to just like take some time to run through all those proposals before we go back to questions and like before we go back to like the conversation we were just having. Does anyone have any like technical questions about this information here? Okay.
I guess I have one, which is in the third, the grant plus ratio multiple match. How are you picturing that treats, I'll say as a treasurer, fundraiser, or whatever, often candidates will go back to the same donors. So they'll say, hey, you gave me $5 when I was doing my initial qualification. And then let's say that, you know, that person, whatever, didn't donate again. And now the candidate has topped out of the fixed grants. But now they go back to that person and say, hey, you gave me $5 10 months ago. Can you support us in this final push? And the person gives them $45 more or something. Like, is that then matched at a ratio, even though the initial $5 was just a fixed grant? Or how does that look for the same donor?
Yeah, good question. So usually programs will not match a donor twice. And so in this case, because like you want to encourage candidates to keep reaching out to more and more unique people. So usually if a donor is like counted for the qualification purposes, they will not be counted for the ratio multiple match purposes in this system. In the pure ratio multiple match, they would be counted for both.
I'm not sure that makes sense. I mean, so if we have, for example, let's say a person doesn't donate in the first part, and they're only donating in the second part where there's matching, but they give $10 in July, $10 in August, $10 in September, and $10 in October, it would all be matched, right?
Yes. So it depends where you set the matching limit. But yes, so like in this case, if it's up to $50. So if someone gives $10, for 5 months, then each of those will be matched. And then the percent.
Donors, you want to make sure you value monthly donors. You have lots of little ladies in this town who give monthly to, again, I used to do small donor fundraising for Senator Berkeley and Senator Wyden, email, and it's all about monthly donors, right? And we get these letters with, again, on Social Security, I can only give you $5 a month, and then give them $5 a month for 15 years. That's I want to make sure we're not discouraging repeat donors.
Yeah, that's true. And so like in the Portland system, it's up to $20. And so if someone gave like 4 donations of $5 each one's gonna be matched times 9. Then once you reach that $20, they're not gonna get matched anymore because they've already hit their match cap.
So in this system, racial multiple matchless grant, the first 250 wouldn't be matched.
That's correct. The first 250 would just go to qualifying and getting that initial grant.
Oh, I guess I'm inclined to actually want to match that also. But although the grant comes from is part of the match. So if you had, in this case, 250 donors and they're all $5 donations, you raise $12.50, you get your 80 grand, right? But if they're all $50 donors, you get 80 grand, and then whatever's above that, you're getting matching. You're pursuing the match already as part of that. I wouldn't want to set up a situation where people say, "Oh, geez, I only want to raise money for my smallest donors at the beginning and hold all my large donors till later." Just raise money means raise the money.
Okay. Beth.
Yeah, I think initially, like a few weeks ago when we were going over these proposals, the ratio multiple match and grant was the most appealing to me at that time. At this point, I think it would be very confusing for voters to especially voters who aren't as politically engaged to fully understand this, because it is combining two systems. Obviously, I think people would have the ability to, but people aren't going to be that worried. The average person isn't going to be that worried around what systems is being used. They just want to know where their money is going. So I think at this point, proposal 3, I would encourage the tiered grant system. I think that's by far the easiest and most accessible to both voters and candidates alike. And like you said, the fact that it doesn't advantage wealthier donors is I think something that we really need to uphold. So I think at that point, that's, I guess, what I would be encouraging, but yeah.
Okay. I think I saw Terrence and Kari.
That's fine.
Thanks for your patience, Corey. I would just say that one of the things I struggle with as a candidate, I didn't know what was coming, right? In that trying to figure out how that $5 equated or how that $20 equated, I could not plan for what was ahead. And I think that from a fundraising standpoint, the big chunk of change is always what I was planning that I needed, right, in order to really do the work. So me personally, I lean towards a fixed grant amount. I like the thought that from $5 to $20 to whatever, every voter then has the ability to impact the tier you hit. I was one of the individuals that got so much support from people that was never a part of the conversation from a voter standpoint, that being able to resonate with that everyday person and say that your $5 actually matter, it impact at the same level that a $50 donation would. I think that's some equity that we rarely see. And I like the thought of that being a part of our discussion to say, look, the grandmother who only has $5 have the same impact as an individual that can afford to get $500 from a scalable point, from a grant point of view. So I like it. I like that fixed grant number because of that. And that ratio is just confusing. It was, for me, untrackable. I was kind of guessing whether or not I would make that max donation or not. And I was leaning towards needing the $20 a little bit heavier, I think, during pressure times than I was the $5. And I think that actually does not show value at the level to that person that made the sacrifice of the $5. From my lens, I'm not talking about holistically. I'm just saying, for me, I start getting pressure from my campaign to reach towards the bigger donors when I was able to build my campaign with those folks who gave $5. So that fixed grant, I think you plan better. I think administratively, I know what's happening, and maybe the county can benefit from that too. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I really appreciate the wisdom from someone who ran under the Portland program too. It just brings a lot to the conversation. Kari.
I guess I'm coming around to this idea of the tier grant being definitely administratively easier. It's probably easier from a campaign perspective. Like, we get this number, we get a check. That's awesome. We get a check. I do know, James, you mentioned earlier, as a fundraiser, and I've had the same experience. There is tremendous power in that matching thing. We know that nationwide, there's tremendous power, because every scam artist, all the way to Donald Trump, uses you can get 10 times your donation right now. And they're mostly lying. They're all committing wire fraud. But that's another story. But there's tremendous power in that match. And I guess I worry a little bit here. I'm not worried so much that I think we should change our mind here, but there is a danger here that by getting rid of the matching element, it's actually harder to raise money from folks. Hey, chip in $5 now. Well, if enough of you do it, I'm gonna get a check. Is not quite as compelling as chip in $5 now, your 5 equals 50. And so I'm a little worried we're gonna actually suppress fundraising by doing this tier system versus the other, but I'm also inclined to just go for it and see what happens.
Okay, I think I saw Marshall and then Terrence.
Yeah, I think I'm shifting my thoughts to the fixture grant system as well. I guess the two things I would say is kind of to Kari's point there. I think the messaging just changes rather than it becoming a multiplier. You're like, hey, I need your help to get to 250 voters. And I think that message still is going to resonate with folks that are going to contribute. The only thing I would say in all that, and I don't see it in the writing up there, is I would have a minimum dollar amount of like $5. Like $1 is not enough in my mind. 250 is not enough. But if you do at least $5, which I think is pretty reasonable for most folks, and I don't think it's going to disadvantage the low income communities. Again, I just, that feels right to me. So at least a $5 contribution, and I would be on board with that.
Okay. I think I saw Terrence and James. And Terrence, you might be on mute.
Not on mute, but we can't hear you.
Yeah. Terrence, you have your hand raised and you're on mute. I'm not sure if you still have a question. Okay, he might have stepped away for a second. So James, why don't you go ahead?
I'm, sorry. And first of all, let me say +1 on Marshall's comment. Like, and I thought kind of all of the proposals, and maybe I was just making this up, but I do want that for sure. Like $5 minimum in whatever model we use. I think that should be the minimum to qualify, whether that's towards the match or towards a fixed grant or whatever. So thank you, Marshall, for making that explicit. As you all know, I'm a supporter of the fixed grant. I do want to just re-raise what I see as the two kind of worst aspects of the fixed grant so that folks can consider that and determine if it's important or not. Well, and I guess the third thing is what Kari raised. I mean, I do think it makes the messaging a little bit harder and than a match, but I still think being able to say, hey, help me unlock $200,000 or $50,000 or whatever it is still compelling to donors, but it won't be as compelling as the match. The two things that I see as being the biggest problems are in the match system. When you get to the top, there's just no more match. You will still, there is still an incentive to raise money because you get to keep the money that you raise, obviously. But there won't be the same pressure for people to like engage more than 1,250 donors for chair, if that's like where we set the top thing. So it does kind of top out, which feels different than a ratio multiple match. And the second thing, which we haven't talked about at all today, but I did raise briefly when we talked about this last time, is especially as it gets late into the campaign, there are going to be violations of, people misusing funds. Let's say for, not malicious reasons, but just because it's hard to run a campaign. And if you've already given the money out the door, it's very hard to like recoup that. Whereas the ratio multiple match, where you're continually cutting checks to people, does make it easier to say, hey, that expenditure that you did is not allowed with campaign funds. And so we're just not going to reimburse whatever the next 10 donations or something to recoup that. Whereas with a fixed grant, like that money's gone. Very hard to recoup. Now, if the initial grant is like a low amount and we know by the time people get to tier 3 that they're already, very sophisticated in their campaign, maybe that's less of an issue, but I do see it as a potential problem with the fixed grants.
Yeah, great points. I think, with the Portland program, it was of course ratio multiple match. And to address your first point, when candidates would reach the match cap, they might do it like a month before the election or, 6 weeks before the election. We saw that they would still keep fundraising because they would still want to bring those private donations in. But it was kind of a blessing too, because I think like fundraising is important. It does encourage you to reach out to more people, but also like, I think we all know it takes up a massive percentage of the time. Like most of what you're doing as a candidate is fundraising. And so I think some candidates who did reach, the match cap did decide to stop because they're like, well, I actually do want to focus on, more just engaging community and more, just other forms of campaigning and talking to voters. So like when candidates reach the match cap, whether it's under ratio multiple match or under a fixed tier system, they, some of them decide they don't want to raise any more money, and that's okay. They want to focus on engaging voters. The others decide they do want to raise more money and they want to just like raise those private donations. So like we did see both of those play out. So you raised an interesting point. On the second one, yeah, you do give out the money. You don't have the ability to say we're not going to give out any more money. But you do still have the ability to penalize people, and penalties, or even rarely like a clawback, clawing back those funds, which you would only do in extremely rare circumstances. But you do have the ability to like discourage candidates from violating the rules too. But interesting points to raise up. I want to make sure, Terrence, if you're back, you do have your hand raised, and you're on mute.
This is crazy. I got to do better. No. I got my point. First of all, thank y'all. I think that the varying views, the thoughts, I really am glad. I tried to run, Daniel, and I got right back to the table. I'm grateful for y'all. I'm grateful for the viewpoints. And if that means anything, as a former candidate, like it's good to have folks that's trying to create something that actually work for people. Like, so as we wrestle, just keep in mind, we all want the same thing, and that's for this to work. So thank y'all. But that's it. That's all I got.
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, and sensing some consensus here. So I'm wondering, I'm sorry, Kari, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, you make your point. I think we're running about the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say I'm sensing a consensus here. The other thing is that do you all mind if we all like the fixed tier approach, can we spend some time plugging in those numbers that you all developed before from your earlier tiers? Is that okay?
Yeah, what I was going to suggest was exactly that. What you have right now in your proposal here is a total of 650 for chair and a total of 250 commissioner, right? Did I get that right?
Yes, that's right.
What we essentially do is we created a lower tier, a junior tier. For chair, I think then we go basically $50,000 for that first one, and then 200, 200, 200, and for councils, 25, 75, 75, 75 for commissioner, right?
Can you repeat those numbers one more time?
Yeah, so 200 gets you 50 grand, and then 500 gets you 200,000, and then 1,000 gets you 200,000.
Okay,
And then 1,500 gets you 200,000.
15.
Same total.
I'm making sure I'm capturing that right.
Proposal like this might be my motion, but you guys can all discuss. And then commissioner, it would be, we said earlier 100.
Mhm.
And that gets you, I would say 50 grand. I'm sorry, 25 grand.
Okay. Okay.
Again, it's like February, March, right? To get hire your person, get going here. And then 250 gets you 75 grand.
Okay.
575 grand.
Okay.
And then 750 gets you 75 grand.
Oh, I love that repeating number. That's great. Okay.
And that's the same total to 50. That's what I would suggest. I'm totally open to thoughts.
Beth, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, the numbers for chairs seem high to me, but those could be totally right. It just for some reason looking at it seems high. Like getting
Sorry, which numbers? The
for
number
the
of
cherries, sorry.
the number of donors, the 500.
The funding, the grants portion. I trust that your math was right on that, Kari. Lord knows I'm not the best at math, but just visually looking at it, it seems quite high. But
It is generous compared to, whatever the other places, but I do think that is what we agreed on. I mean, basically the total is 650 for the chair race, and that seemed right.
and that was the total per candidate or for the race as a whole?
Per
for
candidate.
camp.
Okay,
The
great. I think
maximum
that's where I was in my head. Okay, cool. We're so good. Love
Okay.
it.
Marshall.
So I guess the question I would have with the two numbers between chair and commissioner is what is the number that it takes to get a campaign started? Like, what is the amount of money it takes to get a campaign staff, to get some kind of a facility, to get something along those lines? And then I think for both the chair and the commissioner, that tier should be easily reachable. And I kind of feel like both of those go at the 100 level. And then it's that amount that allows you to get your campaign rolling and really get things off and running at that stage of the game. And then if you want to adjust the other tiers, I'm not against the 650,000 that we approved. I think that's the right number for the chair. And I think the commissioner races are the right number as well. What I'm concerned with is giving people the opportunity reasonably quickly to get a campaign established and get things going. That's what I would like to see. And I don't necessarily want to see that tiered differently between the chair and the commissioner. Because again, we're just trying to get the campaign going at that point is all we're trying to do. And maybe that number is 25,000, maybe it's 35,000. I'm not 100% sure what that number is because I don't run campaigns. That's not what I do. I just spend money on campaigns. So there's a difference between the two. So if somebody with more campaign experience could give me a guesstimated budget of what does it take to get this campaign started, then I think that's where we would be looking at. That's what I'd like to see for that tier one poll.
Yeah, and I think that what's been like helping that question was on my mind as crafting these two. So I'm glad you brought it up. So like, let's say a candidate gets to this in February or March of the election year. We know ads don't come into play until way later. So like for people who are, who've been through this before, if you're February or March, what does that amount, that, you know, that initial first grant look like? That would be helpful to a campaign.
Ooh, really wish we had. I mean, glad Kari's here, but I wish we had Felisa and Becca.
I would look at it as rent. The first for the first 4 months, they get hit February or March, right? So they're talking about the first 4 months after that period. And then into June, let's say. You're looking at rent, you're looking at a staffer. And the reason I think there's a higher dollar amount per chair is like maybe 2 staffers, right? And like basic operational stuff, right? Donor envelopes, walk cards, website, you're paying your compliance firm. You know, Marshall, I take your point that maybe it should be the same for chair and commissioner, but I think maybe for chair, the grant ought to be bigger because they're trying to operate citywide. You might want to have 2 staff people, right? Fundraiser and a field person or something. I guess I'd be open to switching the tier down to even lower than 200, but again, I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm thinking in terms of like 4 months worth of expenses, so 25 grand seems to be like the right. I mean, it might be a little low, but
Yeah. I think honestly, I mean, ignoring again the sheriff and auditor, haven't thought about that at all. But the chair and commissioner, what's written there to me seems right, but I would want to also hear from like, especially Becca, but Becca and Felisa, like what they think on the costs. Because like Kari, I'm picturing that initial grant we're imagining gets a competitive candidate through like maybe 3 to 4 months, you know?
Mhm.
And so is that enough to hire, like to rent a space, hire staff, at least 1 in the district and 2, I think, for chair, and, you know, set up a website and all the things that Kari listed, like maybe that's
we're forgetting something. They also get to keep the money they raised.
Yes, that's totally true. That's absolutely.
This is the grant plus the money they raised.
That's right. Terrence, I think you saw your hand.
Daniel, I can't remember, but in Portland, what was the tier 1? I just can't remember.
250.
You mean if you're running for city council, you need 250.
No, what was
Yeah.
the first grant max on tier 1?
Oh, there weren't any. It was the Portland program doesn't have fixed grants. It has a ratio.
A
So
ratio,
once you-
but it still had a max, didn't it?
Although
Oh yeah,
in practice, it ended up being a grant because the 250 donations almost always maxed you out because it was supposed to be 100 grand. They brought
Right.
it down to 40.
yes.
So effectively, 250, you got a check for 40 grand.
Okay, yeah,
Yes,
that makes
that's
sense,
right.
right? Thank you. I'll tell y'all this. By the time that 40 grand hit, listen, it was gone. So I mean, 25. I just want y'all to know that, like, between the bills when that came, it was gone. So I mean, I don't know what that would look like county wise. I know it's a little different, but 30. I just, I don't know. My 40 was gone. Between the consultants and everybody else, I was striving for tier 2 just to get to the next phase. So if we can just keep that in mind, but county will be a little different for sure.
Okay, so maybe it sounds like is there interest in raising this from 25,000 to a higher number?
I might be interested, but not until I hear from folks who have more experience with what the actual costs are. I could see that going up like slightly, like 35 or something, but I would want, especially because I love the symmetry of the numbers here, like I would want to really feel like, oh, it should be 35, not 25, before we then have to figure out where we're taking 10,000 from the other tiers.
Right. That's a good point, James.
Daniel, are we needing to make a decision on this today, or is this something we're discussing today?
We don't have quorum right now.
Well, so actually Roxana has kindly offered to join for the final 15 minutes to allow you all to take votes. So I think it would be great to have the vote just because we are on this like tight timetable and we still have to get through all the subcommittee recommendations in future meetings. So, what I might suggest is if you all vote on the idea of it being a tiered approach, and then you can then vote to like instruct me to run your initial numbers by all members of the IAC, and then we can like circle back and just like confirm that. That way we at least like have the vote on the method. Does that make sense? Okay. But why don't we keep working through the numbers so we can like at least have that kind of initial proof to run by people.
We should probably, so we need to wait till Roxanne comes back for our forum. But we have a consensus here on the five of us are here that this fixed tiered approach is the right one. Yes. Okay. Good.
Okay.
Progress.
Marshall.
Just a quick observation with one of the things that we are doing in this system over here. Remember, each one of these, 100 or 200 people only needs to be $5. So you could potentially have $500 in raised campaign money or $1,000 in raised campaign money, and that's it. It's not tiered at 9-to-1. So that's really not much at the end of the day, right? I mean, that's one contribution from a higher dollar donor that at the end of the day, at the 603 or 2, right? So just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about these original numbers, because again, I think that 25,000 to me feels low, just based on the things you need to do. I mean, just the cost of getting a website set up, your social media stuff set up, your basic campaign staff set up. I feel like that's a little bit low. And then the timing, to get to that 250, it's not unreasonable. If somebody joins the race, let's say in January, and they're trying to work through the primary, which is only 4 months down the road, they may only get to tier 2, right? At the highest at that point. I mean, it depends. I mean, there's a lot of different things that can happen with different candidates and things of that nature, right? So
remember, Marshall, no primary now.
we're not doing any primary methods.
Just all one race.
All one. Oh, that's right. Excuse me. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for that.
Oh, go ahead.
That does make a difference. So yeah, scratch that. And but regardless, I think that I wouldn't be relying on those $5 contributions really in the first tier to get them going.
What if we increase? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Okay. What if we increase? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, James. Okay. What if we increase this from 25 to 50,000, and then increase this from 50,000 to 75,000? How do people feel about those numbers?
Not great, honestly. I mean, I kind of think it's going to be hard. I mean, we've put tier 1 at a place where it's very achievable, which means there's going to be a lot of people who achieve it. And I think it's going to be hard to give out $75,000 to somebody who only, got $205 contributions, right? That seems like too much. It's more than they need to kind of get started, in my mind. But like I said, I'm open to maybe, especially the commissioner, that it might be more than 25,000, to Marshall's point. But I don't know, like 50,000 seems high for 100 donors.
Okay, Marshall.
Maybe we use the city of Portland as a guide on this. What essentially ended up happening with the small donor races, like Kari said, is they became fixed amounts because they had these aspirations of the multipliers and they ran out of money. So, maybe that $40,000 threshold is the right number to get people started. And it's consistency across the board. Maybe it doesn't cover every single bill that's out there, but it also keeps things in line with like, hey, you reached your first tier, here's some money to get going. And I agree. I totally agree with James. I think 75 was too much, especially if you're going to have a bunch of candidates, but I kind of feel like 40 might be the sweet spot in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you just added 15, then you subtract 5 the other 3, so it's 70, 70, 70.
Okay. Kezia, thank you so much for joining. I think it would be, we're hoping to just like schedule a bunch of votes at the end. Are you able to stay till, how long are you able to stay with us till?
Well, I have to be somewhere at 11, so I may be in transit, starting in about 10 minutes.
Okay. I think that should be fine. So
Okay.
we'll just finish this one thing and then we'll hold some votes. Okay, so Kara, you're saying commissioner would be 70,000 at tier 2, 3, and 4. Oh, like this? Okay.
Yes, you added 15 grand in the first box, you got to take 15 grand out, so 555.
I think I saw Terrence's hand and then Beth. Sorry if I'm wrong about that. Terrence, are you there? Okay, Beth, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree / support with that commissioner ranking. I think that makes the most sense. I was trying to like do the math if we did like 50K versus 30K versus whatever, and the tiers 2 through 4 numbers did not come out too nice. And genuinely, I think that having like a nice, easily understandable number would actually incentivize candidates and make it easier for them to explain to community members. Because if I'm saying if I get to 250 donors, I get 70K, that sounds better than I get to 66K and $666 or whatever it could be, So yeah, I full-heartedly agree with this tier setup. I think it makes the most sense for what we're trying to achieve.
Okay. Terrence.
So I agree that number looks way healthier. It looks balanced. So that's all I was just trying to add. I think we're on deck, especially with the 40,000. And I do agree, like we want to make every first tier easy, but the fight comes as you have the opportunity. So it looks good to me.
Okay, Kari.
Just to catch up, Casey, at where we are, we're coming to a consensus here that rather than a matching program, it's just pure tiers. You hit the tier, you get a grant. And the other piece that we'll come to today is that there's a tier 1 that's really achievable. Like hopefully we'll hit it like in February or March before the November election. Super achievable, small grant. Now we're saying 40 grand for commissioner, 50 grand per tier. Rent an office, hire your first staff person, and then the big dollars come in at those much higher numbers. Is basically the concept of coming to here.
Okay, awesome. It sounds like we are at a good place with Chair and Commissioner. Let's talk about Sheriff and Auditor. Give them some love. So remember, Sheriff is going to be 100,000 total, and that Auditor is going to be 50,000 total. Whoops. For Sheriff, I put that initial number at 30,000. Usually, like sheriffs don't and auditors don't hire campaign staff. Usually they have like a kitchen cabinet and a volunteer to help run it. And most of their money goes to ads. But we certainly want to allow candidates to have flexibility if they do want to hire someone. So Beth.
I'm just wondering if for the sheriff and auditor races, because it's generally less donors, less funds needed, less candidates. I'm wondering what folks feel about doing lesser tiers for that, if that would be more confusing if we just did 3 tiers as opposed to 4. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to put that out there and see what folks are feeling.
Marshall.
No issue at all with lesser tiers for those 2 races, and actually what Daniel has up on the screen looks just peachy to me. Again, they're different races. They're totally different races, and they're usually 1 to 2 people, and sometimes folks just even run unopposed. So I think what's up on the screen to me, I like, and I'm totally fine with.
Okay, James.
Me too. I don't think we should have kind of a lower junior tier or whatever, to use Kari's vernacular. I think what we agreed on before for sheriff and auditor still looks good to me.
Okay. And so with sheriff, remember their average number of donors is 100. Do we want to keep these numbers the same for sheriff, or do we want to lower those?
Yeah, I think Marshall,
I'm
Jamie,
fine.
exactly the same.
Oh, you say keep it. Sorry, what'd you say, Karen?
I think James and Marshall are both making the case that we should keep it exactly the same.
Oh, for for sheriff and auditor, keep it exactly the same. Okay, good. I'm glad I understand that. Okay. Great. Well, this is wonderful. I think we're probably at a place where we can hold a vote. Thank you, Kezia, for like allowing us to be able to have quorum and joining.
In your auditor box, you say 50,000, not 5,000.
Where do you say? Oh yeah.
It was a 0. There you go.
$5,000 to run a campaign. Okay. So do people feel ready to hold a vote? Okay, great. So I think when we phrase the motion, you can just say the motion is to how about this? Why don't we do a 2-part one? The very first is like the motion to adopt a fixed tier system with 4 tiers. Why don't we have that motion first? And then let's talk about the amounts in a second, because I know we have some idea about running it by other people, but I just want to check in with people about that too. So do folks feel like doing is that okay if we just like do the first vote as like motion to adopt the tiers and 4 tiers?
So moved.
I will second that.
Okay. Let's see.
I-
Okay. Okay, Terrence,
Yes.
Kari,
Yes.
James.
Aye.
Oops, what's your name? Marshall,
Aye.
Beth,
I,
Kezia.
Aye.
Okay, the second thing is like, you can either vote to confirm these numbers now, or if you want, you can ask that like we hold and run them by other people first and then come back on the numbers. Personally, I think the numbers look good, but if you all want to do it, that's fine. I would say we have a couple crammed sessions next. So I really want to be conscious of time. And like, if it's possible to hold a vote now, that would allow us a little bit more time next time to keep getting through it. But if you all feel it's really important to run it by Felisa and Becca and other people on the IC, we can absolutely do that. James, go ahead.
I think we should vote on the numbers that are here. And as we did in this meeting, if people make a strong case in the future, like we can, of course, revisit it. But I think these look good. And I will move that that Daniel create a recommendation based on the chart that's here with these numbers for both the qualifying amounts and the dollar amounts.
And also, can you include in that motion that is at least $5 to count towards the tier? Just want to make sure we capture that.
Yes, I'm happy to include that in the motion. I don't know how much you need included in the motion, because there's other stuff, like obviously qualifying donors are within Multnomah County, like I don't know how much you want in it, but yes.
Well, we already did the qualification metrics last time. We're totally covered. This is saying that at least $5 counts towards the tiers, even if you've already qualified.
Okay. What Daniel said.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, Terrence,
Yes.
Kari,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Marshall,
Aye.
Beth,
I,
Kezia.
Aye.
I should have typed your name before. Okay, great. Thank you all so much. Let me just make sure I note that this is 4 tiers fixed. Okay. Amazing. Thank you. That's such a critical point of this program. And so it's excellent to have that piece like filled in. In the final few minutes, I thought like we actually never voted to confirm the match caps, which are listed here. So if we could just hold that vote, that would like allow us like formally like add it to the report. Do folks feel comfortable with that? Okay.
So
I'll make
will
a
move-
motion to,
Oh, good. I'll second Marshall's motion.
okay, I'm making a motion to adopt the match caps as shown on the screen.
Terrence,
Yes.
Kari,
Yes.
James,
Aye.
Marshall,
Aye.
Beth,
I,
Kezia.
I,
Fabulous. Thank you all so much. In the final few minutes, I thought like it would be great if we can clear out one of the subcommittee recommendations, which would allow us to keep on our timetable. So I picked one that I think would have the most consensus. I want to run it by you, but if you all think you want more conversation about it, we can do that too. Does that sound good if I just like spend a couple of minutes talking about the recommendation made by the violations and penalties subcommittee? Because my inkling is that this one would garner the most support quickest, but if you all feel you want more time, that's okay.
Sorry,
so
did
yeah.
you send out the violation? I thought that was the one that you needed extra time on. Have we seen those recommendations?
Oh no, the oversight was the one we needed more time on. The violations I sent around yesterday, in that email, and so if you click on,
I see it. Got it. Yeah. Thank you. I did read through this. Okay.
okay, if you click on the subcommittee recommendation and consensus items, that is the one that listed out, and I've actually updated it to also include the oversight recommendations too, so you can review it in your own time. So I'm gonna pull up that subcommittee. There we go. So I'll talk about the violations one. Scrolling down here. Okay.
Daniel, we're still seeing the previous screen if you're trying to share the violation spreadsheet.
Oh, I haven't yet, but I will jump over and do that. Thanks.
Sorry, got excited.
No, I'm always excited to talk about this too. Okay, great. So when the program has, when there's a penalty or like when there's a violation, the program needs to decide what it's going to do. And that's the core of what the subcommittee has been discussing, is what will the Oversight Commission do. But it took some value statements first. And so the goal of this is, I think, similar to what the Portland approach is, and also what, from what I understand, Multnomah County Elections has the same goal too, which is, the program does need a process to issue penalties in case a violation occurs, but the purpose of the program is not to punish candidates or exact high penalties. The program staff should prioritize establishing trustful communications, educating those parties involved, and providing ample opportunities for campaigns and parties to fix mistakes. The program should only move to penalizations if the violations are not resolved by the campaign committee, or if the violation is particularly egregious. So the thinking behind this is that violations happen, but 90% of the time it's by accident. And there are a lot of rules to keep in mind here. And someone will, some donor will go on and give too big of a donation, or without the campaign even asking for it, or a campaign might be missing the donor's last name when they report a donation. These are small things that are accidents and easily fixed. And we don't want to penalize people for accidents, because if we do, then we're kind of putting this financial barrier on these candidates who are running, and they already have limited resources. And also, then there's a public narrative out there that the program is just penalizing people left and right. And the narrative really needs to be on what this program is doing for democracy. So that's the thinking behind, penalties happen. We need to be able to assess penalties, but we don't want to do it too much. We want to be careful to not penalize candidates, especially if they're making mistakes. So that's the core goal of this. Before we move on to the actual recommendations, do people have thoughts on that goal?
To the extent that this is communicated to the board and to voters, I think it's important to also include in the goal that this is the part of the purpose of this is responsible use of taxpayer funds.
Okay. I'm just gonna make a note of that and I'll clean up the language later.
Yeah, I certainly think that if people are making mistakes, that are honest mistakes, then that's, there should be a cure period and an educational opportunity. If they're doing stuff that's willful, I would think anything that's like willful, like we're just gonna go break the rules, that is by definition to me egregious.
Okay.
That was a challenge, right? But I get that, but like.
Yeah, and like, so let's talk about that. Cure period is a big part of the recommendation. So, and I've tried to finish reading through this. I'm gonna hand it over to Terrence and Beth because they worked on this, and I, want to give them a chance to share. So, if the program staff identifies potential violation, so I think the first thing is, the recommendation says that this is for the board, but the recommendation is not that the board actually identifies the individual penalties, because that would be done in administrative rulemaking, which would be hopefully done by the next oversight commission. So, we don't need to take the time and the time we have left with you all to go through and say like, okay, this penalty is going to mean this dollar, violation. This penalty is going to mean this percentage violation. Like that would take a long time. It's very granular, and it doesn't need to be set in the, by the county board too, like in the county code. That can be done in administrative rulemaking. So that's why you don't see that here. This is more about the process. So, the program staff identifies potential violation, or receives a complaint from another county campaign committee, or receives a private tip from a member of the public, or is alerted to a potential violation by Multnomah County Elections Office. The program staff follows the following procedure. 1, the program staff will contact the campaign committee or its treasurer to request more information, ask for clarifying details, and or encourage the campaign committee to rectify the violation within the cure period, which I'll talk about in a second. The goal is open communication more than penalizing campaigns. Step 2, if the program staff still believes that a potential violation occurred and has not been fixed immediately, staff should again contact the campaign committee and remind them about the cure period and explain the potential consequences of not curing a violation within the allowed time frame. If it's particularly egregious, staff should communicate that an investigation may occur. Step 3 is if a potential violation was not addressed within the cure period, the office will initiate an investigation. And the investigation can range. That's a broad term. That could be like a formal investigation, or it can just be like, all right, we're going to spend, 10 minutes looking through records and, comparing information here. So investigation is a broad term there. But if a potential violation was not addressed, the office will initiate an investigation, and it will assess a penalty based on the investigation's findings, and then issue the penalty decision to the campaign committee. And then step 4 is the campaign committee may pay a penalty, or file an official request for reconsideration. And a request for reconsideration is something the city of Portland has. And in that one, like after the campaign has been received the penalty assessment, there's a form they fill out, which they can submit to the program and say, look, there's these other mitigating circumstances that we haven't talked about before, but we do want to on record. And sometimes this program staff will look at it and be like, that wasn't brought up before, but we appreciate it, so we're going to waive the penalty. So a request for reconsideration is just to the program to allow them to waive the penalty if they want. Or appeal decision through a legal process, which will later be determined through administrative rulemaking. So that is the overall process. The one thing I'll say before stopping is that the cure period is the time when the campaign can fix the issue and not get penalized. So under Portland's program, with the cure period, it's the same as a reporting timeline. So it's every 30 days after the violation, or when you're within 6 weeks of the election, it's every 7 days, which is the same as a reporting timeline. And, so this would align those cure periods within like the Portland program's cure period approach. And the purpose is like, if the campaign fixes a violation, so if it like refunds a donation or, uploads a corrected report, there's no penalty for that. So that's what a cure period means. Okay, that's enough of the rundown. Kari, go ahead.
Does the cure period start when program staff contact to request more information? Or is it cure period from the time of the violation?
I think it's from the time of the violation.
But what if you
That's
don't
a
get
good
notified? What you've done something, you honestly made a mistake. Nobody tells you that for 60 days. You're already outside the cure period.
Well, if no one tells you, you're not going to pay a penalty. So,
I mean, like,
um,
for example, one of the things that you can't do with matching funds is travel, travel outside of a zone that we discussed in our committee. You can't travel to Seattle. Let's say you take a trip to Seattle. You think it's a fundraising trip, so you pay for it out of matching funds. That's a violation. You screwed up. It's an honest mistake. 60 days later, staff says, "Hey guys, you can't pay for a trip to Seattle." Rectify it. Oh, okay. We just have to pay for it. I mean, it's literally the bookkeeping change. It's no longer paid for out of matching funds. Now paid for out of raised funds, which are outside the cure period. And the cure period starts when programs have notified them that there's been a complaint.
okay. How do people feel about that? Like clarifying the cure period starts when the campaign committee was notified of the complaint. Beth.
Yeah, I think that matches up with what Terrence and I's intent was. Because you're right, we don't want to inadvertently penalize people just because they didn't know or they weren't aware of the violation. So, yeah.
Okay.
But Terrence, correct me if I'm wrong if that wasn't our intent.
No,
I'm pretty sure that's
no.
what
That
we
was
were-
our intent for sure, Beth, for sure. Yeah.
Terrence and Beth, I've been talking a lot. Is there anything else you want to add? Because you all were on the subcommittee that worked on this.
I know Kezia has her hand raised. I don't know if she had another question before we chime in.
Yeah, go ahead, Kezia.
I just wanted to say that I agree with the intent as Beth and Terrence laid out. That was it. I just think that makes sense. And so I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there.
Okay, appreciate that. Subcommittee members, is there anything you want to add to this conversation?
I think like Daniel said, we really want to make sure that we're giving folks like a learning opportunity, an opportunity to amend their honest mistakes, but also are aware that some people might just abuse the program slightly and abuse their funds. And people who do that should be held accountable, but the vast majority of violations are just honest mistakes. And especially if you're not a person who's deeply embedded in politics and in this world, like we don't want to harm first-time candidates who are really rooted in community, but maybe not so much in politics, just for an honest mistake. So that was really and throughout this whole thing, that was, like Daniel said, our very grounding, I think, overall mission, I'd say.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I agree. We wanted to just make sure that people got a shot, that we assumed good intentions and that people would have the ability to learn without just like getting kicked out or getting penalized. We want folks to be able to compete without like this overarching stress or overarching concern that every little mistake means it's the end of the program for them. I didn't want people coming in stressed or worried. I wanted a program and consequence to a program where people felt cared for, and that they would have a pathway to rectify mistakes more than like this intentionality of wickedness. Like, that I've seen way less of that, if at all, during my campaign than like honest mistakes. And I like that the city of Portland always gave you a chance to just rectify them instead of like, give us the money, give us the money. It was always about let's fix it and let's go. And I think that worked for most of us.
Kari, and then I have a request from Marshall to get a vote. So Kari, go ahead.
I agree we should vote right away, but that fourth bullet about consultants and contractors makes no sense to me. given the campaigns that run their own campaigns and have their violations. I'm particularly concerned about compliance firms who might have many, many clients. Again, the client makes a mistake, the compliance firm just reports them. And I wouldn't want to, see somebody get booted just because their client made a mistake that they have nothing to do with.
I think I think the goal of that was, they're currently, like, the city of Portland, it never assessed a penalty against a compliance firm or a consultant. It always assessed, the violations were always with the campaigns.
So obtained an uncured violation means the county elections oversight team applies a fine or a penalty to the consultant or contractor. Not that the consultant for a campaign that got a penalty.
Yeah, this is only if in a rare case that this happens, but only if the case that, like, it's found that the contractor has been repeatedly violating the rules of the program. I think that was what the intention was designed. Was that right, Terrence?
So again, I will try to be brief. I think, I agree with James. Maybe we just shouldn't vote on this and move it out. But so the intent was this: like, if we have consultants and folks like this that are violating the terms and the rules, that at some point we are able to go, look, you cannot receive funds from the matching. You can't receive matching donations when you constantly, as a consultant or firm, committed violations, because usually that's just on the campaign when the firm could have been part of those intentional violations and consistently did it. So maybe this is a longer discussion because I know I got a hard stop too, so I don't want to stay here. We might just come back to that and get more discussion for sure. I agree, Marshall.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, everyone, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today. We got through a lot. And so we'll circle back on the other things later.
This
All
was
right,
great.
y'all.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone.
Thanks, take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, thanks.